Hello, everyone. I am so excited to introduce you to Danica and Meera, two amazing contributors to this incredible book, A Better World is Possible. The subtitle is Global Youth Confront the Climate Crisis. And to you both, and for our listeners, I want to give you some context of why I was interested in this book in particular, because you might think, what has this got to do with wellness and yoga and the things that we usually talk about? But way back when, in the early 90s, I was a young teacher doing my education at the University of British Columbia. And in those days, environmental education was at the forefront of how I was taught, right? And so I took that as an international educator, elementary school teacher, and everywhere I went, we always incorporated a large component of environmental education, not as a standalone unit, but sort of weave through everything that I taught. So it's a particular deep interest of mine. I think from British Columbian roots, we have the trees and the forestry. So I think that's probably where that has come from. So when I saw your book, it stopped me in my tracks because then it felt both extremely familiar and something that I thought I haven't seen this work for a while. So I work in the classroom still. We have an online amazing community of educators, but environmental education is not something I hear about. So, and in the yoga world, I don't know if you're both familiar, but one of the yoga philosophy is one of the yamas and yamas is about ahimsa, which is being a nonviolent. So it's our connection to the world and the way that we be in the world in a way that is how do you not the opposite of nonviolence, but that is kind and compassionate and that we care about the environment, right? And so you'll see in our space in the yoga world in particular, you'll see a lot of activists, whether it's with animals or trees or the climate, whatever it is. So this is a particularly interesting topic to me. And as Danica and I were talking about at the beginning, that climate and environment does weave through everything that we do in terms of health and wellness. So that's sort of the context of why you're both here. But I'd love to hear from you both. What was the thing that sparked, what was like that download? What was the spark that you thought this book needs to get out into the world?
Well, I make graphic novels, and I hadn't seen a graphic novel specifically about climate change and the climate crisis. Like there was one, but it was like maybe 10 years ago, and that was pretty comprehensive, but like nothing that was really contemporary and told the whole story of like what is our relationship with the planet and what is happening right now, and that was kind of geared toward a younger audience. So I was really interested in, like you said, filling that spot that hadn't been seeing in the classroom or in on the bookshelves. So I was kind of interested in that, just as a form. But also, I think I grew up, with a very tight connection to nature and to like walking in the woods by myself as a kid or with my dog and having that real relationship with nature and with the earth. And so I started just from that place of love for the planet. And then when I started doing a little more research into climate change, I got really like, oh my gosh, what is happening? What are we doing here? So I got really interested in learning more about that, but also taking some kind of action to counter the climate crisis. So that was sort of how I started off thinking about this book. How about you, Mira?
Yeah, I think we were both in the Pacific Northwest, like around the same time. I was out in Washington and Oregon, at that same in the 90s, and that was where I really just the environment was such a focus. Just like Danica, I loved running around in the woods and cutting through the creek to get to school when I was like in second grade. Like, so just being in nature and outside and finding eggshells from a robin and all these like little tiny things that just made me like fall in love with the natural world. And then in college, I did a travel program, and really it made it was just like what I cared about most deeply. And it was kind of when environmental studies was sort of just even barely beginning to be an actual thing you could study. And so, but I did end up in Seattle for my undergraduate, and the big trees and nature is just so awesome in the like literal sense of the word out there. But you can experience that everywhere. And so like really the concern about how humans can live like wonderful, rich lives and not do it at the expense of all of the beautiful natural world around us, that is our resources and our sustenance, and that we just often don't recognize that we really, really desperately need clean water and we need clean air and we need places to go and recharge, that are not on devices. And we just need those things on a very fundamental human evolutionary level. And so that's kind of been my abiding interest. So I did a lot of nonprofit activism out west when I was in my 20s, and then in my 30s shifted to wanting to write more longer and more complicated stories about humans in the natural world. And so that led me to be a science journalist for a good 15 years or something like that before Danica and I reconnected. We overlapped in New York earlier when I was in grad school and realized that this was just like a really lovely way to bring our two skills together, like my long-term writing about the environment and climate change and reaching to new audiences through like powerful imagery, which is so strong a vehicle for storytelling.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And I think what we're hearing from all three of us came from this very strong environmental, nature loving background. And that is something that is not a given for childhood these days, right? And so we do find children behind their screens more so than in the forest. And so what I love about this book is that, as you say, you're bringing together the storytelling, the personal narrative, and the science. And I do think, I think about Anxious Generation. And one of the things he talks about is having the children or the teens in particular working together to say, to get them off screen. One way is to say, we want to work against. So get to tackle the interactivism against the big tech companies. And so that really is meeting preteens and teenagers where they're at, because a lot of our governments or our leadership in or administration in the world are not putting their eyes on nature as much as we would hope. And so coming from, we've seen, and you've talked about this in the book, but like Greta from, remind me, Sweden. Right.
Sweden, yeah.
Yes. And so we've got these young people involved in activism that are creating more waves than the grown-ups. Right. And so what you both are offering is a platform in which to give them information in a storytelling way, but also the facts and how they can use their voices in there. So tell us more about, where that storytelling idea came from.
Yeah, I really wanted to make a book that was um, educational and informational and gave a lot of background about what is going on with the science behind climate change. But that can be very boring to read about, especially for kids. Like they don't want to read a book full of data. So,
Adults don't
I
either.
want, yeah,
Yeah.
adults don't either. Like I mean, I love nature and I love, beautiful writing and poetry, but like I don't want to read a whole book just about nature with no human stories in it. So I really wanted it to have real people in it and interesting stories that are engaging. And so yeah, that was kind of the idea behind making the book, was having it have some kind of core human story that would pull people into like wanting to know what's going to happen or wanting to know where this person is going. Um, but then also kind of sneak in that educational element of it.
Yeah, and that's really how we came up with the structure, is like just as a narrative writer, uh, I recognize that you need like a place and people to just animate any good story. And when Danica told me that she'd been at the climate strike in 2019 in New York City, where there was a 250,000 people out on the streets, and she was there with her baby, and that whole event had really been inspired and organized by young people, I was like, oh my God, that's it. It's like there's the story. And so then it was just kind of fun, being a reporter and doing the sleuthing to try to figure out like who were those young people that were so, so driven to help get people on the streets to bring attention to this thing that is like so big and so kind of complicated, but also kind of straightforward about climate change. It is transforming the world. We're burning too many fossil fuels and it's changing the atmosphere, and all these things are happening as a result. And yet, old people seem like they're not doing anything about it. So like, let's find those kids, and find out what their stories were, what brought them on stage to be talking to thousands of people in New York City. Like what were their stories? And that could be our way to invite people into a story, to make it personal, and then through them to show the universal. And also to have these, we inserted all these little interludes throughout the book where we sort of pause the narrative, right? When you're like, what's going to happen next? And then we're like, wait a second, let's talk a little bit about eco grief, or let's talk about like, what is climate change, or what does religion have to do about it, or what about biodiversity and animals? And like, so we pause, and then there's chances for lots of information to be conveyed, but it's all woven into the storytelling.
Oh, I love that so much. And so let's think about, right, the spectrum of when your reader comes through this experience on the other end, you might have some that say, yep, sign me up. It sparked something in me. I'm saying preteen to teens, right? Sparked in me. I'm going to follow Danica and Meera's path and become an activist, through to a reader who might read that thing. Okay, great. Now, but where do I fit in? So let's talk about those children or teens that say, okay, I want to dip my toe in. What are some examples of what readers can do just to sort of get started?
Yeah, that's kind of how we end the book, is with this message that no matter what you're interested in and no matter where you're coming from, there's a place for you in the climate movement. And there's something you can do, whether it's like on a small personal level or with your family or with your school, or on a national level, and or joining with others in a group. There's something that everyone can do. And so, we have kind of a list of, all kinds of, you can get involved with your school environmental club. You can, plant trees, you can garden, plant a pollinator garden. You can get involved with politics and go door to door knocking and talking to people about climate change. You can, once you're old enough to vote, voting is very important. All these different ways that people can get involved. You can study science and become a scientist, or, someone um, working in ecology or forestry. There's so many different things. Art, of course, is a huge theme of it,
Yeah.
as I am an artist. So, and Rebecca and Jamie, who are both featured in the book, are both artists. One is a filmmaker, and the other works with making, she got involved with climate action through making giant trash puppets in her school program to draw attention to the waste created in cafeterias. So just like so many different ways that people can get involved, and from the very small to the very large international levels.
Yeah, that there's really no wrong answer. And there's like ambitious things you can do, and there's just not wasting your food on your plate, which is, 30% of our food gets wasted. So if you eat all your peas, you've just done a climate action, so it can be
Yeah.
small things. And also that there might be times when you want to do something bigger, and there might be times when you want to do something smaller. And, maybe it's door knocking, like Danica said, and talking to people, or maybe it's just having a conversation with a friend who's never thought about it, or is as concerned as you are, but doesn't know that you're as concerned, that you share the concern. And so even just speaking about climate change is a climate action. More people, like there's actually surveys from Yale that show that many more people are concerned and alarmed about climate change than talk about it on like a regular basis. And so it's a climate action to just speak it out loud, speak the concern.
Yeah, that reminds me of the mindfulness practice, right? First is getting curious. So
Yeah.
when you're thinking about what project might be useful for your community or your school or your neighborhood, like it can just be as small as that. It doesn't even have to be your full town, right? But even in your neighborhood, thinking, okay, getting curious, like what's missing that would make a difference here? Do we all have recycling? Do we all have clean water? Do we notice trash in the streets? Just even basic things, as you say, like what's our waste like, right? And so I think starting there is getting curious and then just noticing. You could keep a journal, right? And noticing, okay, what am I seeing in my neighborhood, in my schools? There's lots of examples I know in our school here, my daughter's school, they just notice a lot of plastic. So the
Hmm.
schools are receiving funding for certain food or whatever, and they notice a lot of it comes in plastic. So one classroom, they had a big bin, and they tracked all the plastic that ever all the children, all the
Wow.
students did for a week, and then 2 weeks, and then up to a month, and they could see
Wow.
what difference that made, and then did some research about what plastics like out in the ocean or what. So when you just start to use that curiosity and noticing and just engaging, think, okay, well, this is one area we can impact. So it's looking at what difference can we make on a small scale that also has a large scale implication, right? So, yeah, I love that. So, what role, thinking about this, and what role do you think the grown-ups have along this journey? So, children may be sparked, but some children may need a grown-up to kind of take them along. What do you see the role of the grown-ups, whether it be, families or educators, therapists, or whoever else that might be with these children?
Get outside. I mean, part of like, right, we all just started this conversation. All of us were so impacted by our experiences outside. And I think, we were of a generation where kids were still able to roam, kind of free roam a lot more and just to explore and develop that exact thing that you just said. Curiosity is so, so key. And curiosity kind of comes from having the room to explore and then develop like the next question. So I think a big role is getting kids outside or letting them go outside, like both of those things and giving them the freedom and not, succumbing to too much fear that I think is easy to fall into, in that way. But Danica, you're a mom of young kids. What do you think?
Yeah, my kids are in elementary school, and I think just like we were saying, having conversations, talking about how I'm feeling about the earth or about nature, and just sharing that with them, not in a like preachy way or anything, but just kind of when it comes up, talking about like, oh, that's too bad that someone threw this trash somewhere because plastic's not good for our earth, or I take them to a lot of protests myself because I do attend protests when I can, and so I just take them along. I've taken them to climate meetings even when it's not like a real kid-oriented meeting, and I think just being around people who care about the earth and are doing different various actions is cool for them to observe that. Um, and yeah, I think mindfulness really plays into it by being, aware of nature around you, noticing things that you then come to really care about, noticing like, oh, if we plant this milkweed in our garden, look who comes to visit. We have bees and the occasional butterfly here now and stuff like that, that I think is really cool for kids to spark that love of nature.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you too, once again, as we talk about the yoga mindfulness practice, often educators, teachers say, how do I get started? Right. And what I'm hearing from this conversation too is just get started in a small way. Right. It doesn't have
Hmm.
to be, I'm going to speak about environmental education from 3:30 to 4 o'clock every day. Like, no, right. It's just about
Right.
how do we embed it with a sparkle of intentionality. So just listening to you there, I think about one of the things I've noticed here in New England. I didn't grow up here, so I find the weather is it's a lot. It's both freezing cold and boiling hot. And so I wait with my daughter at the bus, and we have these moments throughout the year, whether it's the leaves falling down, like
Yeah.
the awe of nature, like, wow, that is so amazing the way the leaves come down. Or, oh my gosh, it's super hot today. Or, oh, isn't it so freezing today? Don't you need a jacket? So just the talking about the climate, for me, it could be that next step. It's that British inside me, but that next step of saying, oh, I heard from the people who grew up here, it wasn't this extreme. I wonder why that is. Let's go research that together.
Yeah.
We do have the change of the weather here and climate crisis. I feel like sometimes we think it's only warming, and
Hmm.
so I think there's probably a myth there. I don't know enough about the science. I'm reading your book was so helpful, but it's not just the warming. We had the coldest winter
Yeah.
ever, but that also, as you talk about, that affects it too. So the changes that are happening here, I wonder how that's impacting other places in the world, And so looking at the interconnectedness of our planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
also bring home a lot of books for my kids, of course. So, just reading picture books about nature or about climate, about people, inspiring people who have helped the planet, like, the woman who planted all those trees in Africa, or, like things like that that are good, good to, it's always a good way to introduce topics to kids is through books.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's tons out there. I mean, new
Yeah.
ones, but also tons of old ones. I mean, when we were young in the 90s, there were tons of environmental education
Hmm.
books about all different places. So in Africa or in the rainforest, in the jungle, so lots of different habitats, and also
Yeah.
in, the Arctic and that kind of thing. So certainly lots of picture books. I love that. We have a picture book about the ocean in the Pacific Northwest, and at the back I've got, 10 ways to make a difference. So
Nice.
lots of
Yeah.
different ways. So tell me a story. We love stories. Tell me a story when you've been sharing this book with young people. Have you had any response or any spark of ideas from any of your readers?
So, I mean, like I've been so, it's been so much fun bringing it out. We had the best event because Danica and I don't live in the same state. I'm in Massachusetts, she's in Kentucky. And so we have only been able to do one event actually like physically in the same space, but also in that same place was New York City, where three of the four kids that are featured in the book are still there. So that was like really powerful of just we've spent so much time with these youth and their stories, and then to have them up there actually reading their stories from the book was just like that was really powerful for me, but also just all the audiences that we've met. I've had um, 8-year-olds being really curious. I've had high schoolers who were about to go off to college in the fall who were saying that they were basically planning their majors, thinking like I want to figure out how to be an economic development person who's thinking about climate as I'm doing that work. So they're like thinking about how to make the trajectory of their life, have
Mhm.
climate work be just folded into what they're planning on doing. But it's been really fun for me. I mean, so many stories of all ages using this as like a conversation tool and inspiration.
Yeah, and even one of the kids that she's no longer a kid, but who was in the book, Rebecca, she mentioned to us that she had had a few years of rough personal life, and one of her mentors passed away, and then she read our book that we made about her and was re-inspired to thinking about her younger self and how involved she was in climate action, and she kind
Yeah.
of got re-inspired by seeing the book. So that was pretty cool.
That's
Yeah, that was
wonderful.
incredible.
So when I read the book, the first thing I thought about was, I wish this was in the classroom. And I really
Mhm.
see it because it has the scientific educational component as well as a narrative. I really see this as a tool. Is that kind of what you were hoping to, that it would land in a classroom? And sort of how do you envision teachers using that with the students?
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of our hope, is that it will find its way into classrooms and curriculum, and um, be used as a tool that it will, I didn't want it to, we didn't want to like make it a textbook or something, like too strictly educational in that sense, but we definitely wanted to see it be used as a teaching tool, and start conversations about, just the basic science behind climate change, and um, the other factors, like the industry, the energy industry, and the politics, and how all these factors are woven together and interconnected through this umbrella topic of climate change, economics and income inequality and migration, and just so many things that are um, part of the conversation. And so we wanted this book to touch on all these different things and be something that could be used in a classroom, whether it's a science class or a literature class, or or a social studies class because it really touches on so many different aspects of our lives.
Yeah, I think it really is very adaptable in that way. Like it could easily be used in the middle school for a climate change curriculum, and you'd have like all the pieces already there, or you could zero in, like Danica saying, specifically to the environmental sciences or about the humanities part. I actually just learned that somebody used it for a resistance movements undergraduate class. You know, after they'd spent the semester learning about Harriet Tubman and all these people that seem a little distant, you know, from kids, and then they were able to like both enjoy the graphic novel format and read about contemporary right now. These kids are alive and doing this work right now, that resistant movements are ongoing. And so yeah, so it's fun. Yeah, it's definitely was written with the hope that it would get into school classrooms. And it feels like that there's a lot of room about how it could be applied just based on the teacher's creativity.
Yeah. And I can see a debate club too. I can totally
Yeah.
imagine the pro and against, and having to really critically think about,
Hmm.
or if you, even if you were to create a different planet, like what that might look like and,
Mm.
what is happening, what's not happening, the trajectory. That would be interesting. So when
Hmm.
you read this, to be fair, because most of us, our mind is no longer on the climate crisis as grown-ups, it can feel a little depressing and down and oh my goodness, like we've got our eye off that. But on the other side of that, is there hope? Do you see hope coming out of this?
It's so interesting that you say that, we're not paying attention to it now because when we started this book, I felt like there was so much energy around the climate movement. We started thinking about it the idea sparked for me in like 2016, 2017. And then we worked on it through, the late teens and into the early 20s. So it felt like for a while there was a huge amount of energy, especially around the youth climate activism. And then there's like the older generation who's been at it for decades. And since moving to Kentucky, I've met a lot of folks who have been, working with like the Sierra Club, for example, for decades and really continue to do good work. You just don't necessarily hear about them in the news all the time. Um, and I think, it was for a moment there, it felt like it was really in the national conversation and in politics. So I think that really comes and goes from, year to year, decade to decade. But yeah, I mean, I think our current moment, things are just really crazy and people aren't paying as much attention to it because of all the upheaval politically and globally. There's always a new crisis every day, but this is really the crisis of our time. And if we don't figure this out, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. But the exciting news is that, as Meera has really introduced to me, is that we have all these solutions and we can use them and we can if we have the political and the public will to make changes, we can do that and we can really turn things around and make huge improvements in what the world is going to look like. Meera, you're the expert.
Yeah, no, I think that's all really true. And there's like it definitely comes like in terms of the recognition of the crisis. I totally agree with Danica. Like this is the biggest story of our lifetimes, like period, full stop. Even all of the news that seems to be dominating the world, when you really think about it, they're like energy stories. We're fighting over resources. We're fighting over control of oil and gas. We're fighting for control over minerals and rare earth minerals. Like these are all things that are fundamentally about energy and earth systems that are causing the climate crisis. And it's been fascinating watching kind of like I'm on all these email listservs and reading Bill McKibben's Substack and everything. And it's like there is an energy transformation that's happening right now. And the war in Iran is horrific. But one result of that is that all of these places all around the world are like, oh, wow, we can put in solar and renewable energy for a fraction of the price of fighting over oil and gas that's just going to go up and up and up and cause us so much destruction. And suddenly places in Africa, places in Southeast Asia are getting like not just energy independence, but like political independence by um, transforming their energy system to what's cheapest, which is renewables and is clean. And so like there are these fascinating things that are happening. And the hope, we talk about hope in the book very directly of like the best way to feel hope is to do something. To just sit and just be paralyzed with sadness or fear or grief. Like we recognize that sometimes we all fall into that place. Danica and I have struggled with that. The characters, the people in our book have struggled with that. But the best antidote is to get up and do something and find the other people who care about this like you do. During the book tour, I did some events at a Mass Energize conference, and it was hundreds of people from all over the state of Massachusetts. Young people had posters of actions they were doing in their own towns, like figuring out how to divert food waste and get it to people who needed food. And there were people from small little towns, their sustainability offices, and it's like all this stuff is happening on the grassroots level that just it's just not in the news. And so just if you feel like you're like it's not possible, recognize that there's actually tons of work happening, and the best way to feel hopeful is just seek out people. We write about Shiv Sohn as one of the young men in our book, and he was really into politics, but like a lot of his friends were kind of like not really into the eco part of it. And he was getting more and more concerned. He read the IPCC report saying, we have until 2030 to transform our energy system. And nobody was really caring of his friends. So he, got on social media and he went looking for who does care. And he found Gia Bastida, who's another one of the characters, and ended up becoming one of the organizers for that climate strike. And that was all just like, okay, let's just see who else cares about this thing that I care about. And through that, hope emerges, and he's gone on to start an organization called Triage that's working on getting green politicians elected there in New York and getting solar put onto public schools. So like hope is like, it's a verb. It's not a noun. It's not a thing you have or don't have. It's like you do it.
I love that so much. I want to highlight two things you said, Meera. One of them is I'm hearing a lot of global interaction. So I
Mm.
think about right now, my husband the other day, he's from Australia, and he was talking about the forest fires
Oh,
in
yeah.
California and what's happening to the land there. And he was saying Australians now well, they have been for a long time, no doubt, but they are working more closely with the Californians about
Yeah.
how to manage the land, especially
Mm.
based on Aboriginal indigenous roots, right? And so that the land of Australia, they've been dealing with forest fires for many, centuries. And so that global interaction, like we can work together across countries, right? This is not a problem for one country. It's a problem for all of us. And the second piece, so that was that global connection, but the other piece is about so many of us are feeling helpless at not being able to make a difference, especially living in some of our countries which are very political. And what you said there is a reminder that figure out what you care about. So if you can't change your government or the politics or that storyline, the negativity and the fear, you start with what you care about and go find other people who care about that same
Yeah.
thing. And as you say, action, that it's in the action that gets you out of this, fear paralysis, right? And so when you're making a difference, when you're moving forwards, that's what gets the momentum.
Hmm.
And, that point about, yes, it's not on the news. It's not really newsworthy. Who's going to plant a tree? Like that's not interesting. But when to your point about when you get to the local level, that's when it becomes more interesting. Look at local papers or local
Yeah.
conversations or local environmental clubs or water club, whatever it is. But I think that, yeah, I appreciate you saying that. There's more happening than I think all of us realize.
Hmm.
And it's about us putting our hand up to say, yes, we care and we can do something about this starting right now. Right after this conversation, you could do one little thing that you don't even know will spark,
Yeah.
speaking of global, something that could make a difference across the world.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Excellent. So, how do listeners find more about this work? How do we grab your book? And what do you see as sort of next? What's on your horizon?
We have our website where it has a lot of info about the book and further resources. It's a better world, the book.org.
Dot,
Is that correct?
dot org, correct.
Okay. I just had to think about that for a second. And yeah, you can buy it anywhere, any bookstore online. Um, yeah. And
You can go to your library and ask them to get it, and or ask your schools to seek it out. But yeah, it's available in all the usual places you buy books. It's going into its second and third printing. So some places you might have to be, if you don't find it one place, just seek out other places because there's inventory out there. But yeah, the resource page, the website, like Danica said, has there's resources at the end of the book, but then there's even a longer, more expanded version that we're updating on the website. So that's like a great, just a teaching tool in and of itself. Things like if you want to listen to podcasts, well, you need to add this one. If you want to listen to podcasts, if you want to read things, if you want to actually get involved, if you just want to educate yourself, there's resources there. There's a downloadable poster that's beautiful that Danica created. There's lots of opportunities there.
Beautiful. So parting words, any words of wisdom, Danica, as we close up here?
yeah, I think just, get outside, appreciate nature and find some action that appeals to you and that will be fun and enjoyable and bring you together with people, ideally. Some action that you can take to help the planet.
Beautiful. And you, Meera,
Yeah,
parting
I'd
words.
echo that and just hold on to that. Things change when we least expect them to. So sometimes it can feel, the whole like it's darkest before dawn. It's like it can feel like all the forces are moving against the climate work that needs to happen. But, I totally believe in paradigm shifts and that people, oh my goodness, just and appreciate the wildlife of Tennessee. Many, many-footed creatures walking by me. Um, and
Oh,
that there
no.
could just be, things can shift. And I think the fact that there is so much um, work against beauty right now in the world is just going to make people more hungry for it and ready to find equilibrium. Even all of the focus on being on digital devices and not being out in the world, I'm already seeing reactions from younger people about wanting that. And so I think that there is just going to be a transformation that is ready to happen. And like Danica said, in terms of climate solutions, we have all the tools we need right now. It's just a matter of just putting them into place.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I have been seeing articles, this sort of we're in this transformation, this return to real, to return to what matters. And I mean, I saw an article yesterday about young people are going against GPT because it's taking their jobs away. And so you're
Mhm.
right, you're having seen a lot more students are saying,
Yeah.
wait a second, we don't want anything to do with this AI anymore. We're
Yeah.
seeing the impacts of being on social media and yeah, wouldn't that be amazing if we
Yeah.
did? Yeah, it
Yep.
feels hopeful. It does feel
Hmm.
hopeful that we will start to use tech in a more, in a way that's for good. Like, how can we use tech for climate change in an easier way that we could,
Right.
because a lot of the work that you're doing, right? The fact that we're even in this conversation, that tech allowed this
Sure.
conversation
Yep.
to reach
Yep.
more people, right? But that's for good. How do we use tech for good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also spend a lot more time outdoors. Thank you
Yeah.
so much to you both. Congratulations. It's an
Thank you.
incredible work. I really hope it spreads the world. I hope it gets everywhere. And hope there's conversations with students all over the planet making a difference. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Giselle. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah.